Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch.
Taylor, do you take Daniel to be your husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?
These two better get married. Otherwise, we're going to have our very first season of nobody getting married. So they better get married, or at least, or I'm going to get upset. Just joking. It very much looks like they are going to be a yes, yes. But I thought that Sarah was a yes, so who knows? It's so weird. What a jerk. Well, let's see what happens.
I do.
Okay, well, if anyone was going to say no, I thought it was going to be her, but I very much assume that he's a yes. If he's a no, then I don't know how to gauge anything. So let's see what happens.
Daniel, do you take Taylor to be your wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish till death do you part?
I will say those vows or those proclamations are the classic ones, right? It has a certain classic tradition to it.
Absolutely, I do.
I'm quite sure that they edited that for suspense. I'm sure he said it at the soonest point that he could. But, okay, so we have one marriage. Yeah, what a journey. What a journey this season. Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I remember thinking this. I probably said something, especially when Taylor had that whole Instagram thing after the hallway. I thought, well, she's just clearly not into him. Why would she do? I mean, even if it was an unconscious thing, why would you have that as a reason to heavily be suspicious, even if it were true that he knew? If you found your person, so you're clearly just looking for a way out. The way that Taylor's parents were kind of reacting to, I will say, so I haven't been reacting to them because there's been nothing really to say. I guess I will summarize and say that from the very beginning, they call him Dan, so I'm going to call him Dan, that Dan was very good with his words. He's very consistent and kind and loving. And Taylor seemed, and she would say this, that she really appreciated that. And for a long period of time, it looked like it was a lopsided, one-sided relationship where he was really into her and she was just like, okay, thank you. You know, like Han and Leia, I love you. I know. That kind of thing. And I guess in relation to that, Han was just being scared of his vulnerability. I think Taylor is also. So, well, okay. If the way Taylor talks about her previous partner, she would say like, I've never been with someone like you before, because he was so nice and complimentary and I love you. And that made me be sad for Taylor, because you would just think that she would have someone in her history that loved her and would say such things. Because how old is Taylor? I mean, she's not that old. Yeah, so 31. So you would hope that by that point. Maybe given, so I could see a scenario where people did love her, but she doesn't express herself very expressively. And it takes someone like Dan, and in all of his infatuation or steadiness or humility, other people in Dan's shoes might have dated Taylor and felt humiliated by expressing affection and getting a very lukewarm response. Dan just seemed to not care at all. Not that he's some kind of wuss or something, but that he was secure enough. And his parents seemed to exhibit, we can never tell, but, sort of like with Hannah's parents last season, they seem like stand-up people, but given the way Hannah was, something went wrong there in all likelihood. So just looking at the goodness of parents in a scene in a reality TV show, it's hard to tell. But the parents did look like they were willing, that both parents and the dad seemed willing to be vulnerable and cry and expressive and giving people the benefit of the doubt, listening to Dan and not having their own agenda, while also being concerned, but in a kind way. So Dan might actually have a lot of secure attachment, and he was not rattled by Taylor's lukewarm response, and or there were indications, because, we can never tell what's happening fully, right? There's a chance that with Dan and Taylor, when they would be in bed together, rolling around, that Taylor could look into his eyes and express love and affection and openness in a way that she can't or doesn't verbally or non-verbally when they're not rolling around, Who knows? That isn't strange to happen. But at the very least, that configuration seemed to work. And that's something that happens in life and is something that's hard to detect. And certainly there aren't TikTok videos about this, because there's no diagnosis. We're not talking about maybe we're talking about some avoidant attachment from Taylor. But, maybe. And I've seen that before. I've seen people with insecure attachment styles matching up with a very secure person. And the secure person just rolls with it, doesn't take it personal, can see through the defense. And thus, the person who has the insecure attachment, their defenses will diminish because they don't have reason to engage in their defense because there's so much indication that they're not at threat attachment-wise, and can even get married within, a month. I'm just kind of looking back at the notes. Dan, his sister was born blind. They actually talked about that. The father did. And he said, I haven't had many long-term relationships. And he was really worried about being short, which is really funny given that he's 5'8". But, people particularly outside of Minneapolis, general Minnesota people tend to be extremely tall on average. Taylor, colonoscopy nurse. There were some funny scenes in the pods about that banter. Taco Bell inner lip tattoo I have written down. And she said something along the lines of, I have a good dad. He is recovering from cancer now, which reminded me to appreciate him more. So I don't know what that says. Also, I have another paraphrase. I used to have a problem with body issues, and now I don't weigh myself anymore. Okay. It's not uncommon. I have felt insecure. It might be indicative of a disorder, but it could just be being a woman in our society. I have felt insecure in past relationships, worrying about him leaving me. I'm glad I took notes on that because that's informative, right? Because with Dan, we saw a bit of that vulnerability, when she would say things like, you make me feel so safe. She wouldn't say it that much, but she would say things kind of like that. And so it's interesting that the way she comes across is fairly dismissive and cold and not extremely, but, compared to Dan anyway. But Dan also loved in I could see Dan being with someone else like a Sarah and looking relatively cold and muted. But compared to Taylor, Dan was a shining beacon of warmth. But it sounds like she has worries about people leaving her. And I wouldn't be surprised if people left her because of what I was saying earlier, that she would push people away with her avoidant attachment. People did love her, and they got the impression that she just wasn't interested. That happens all the time. And it's not a thing that people talk about frequently, right? Because we normally hear stories about people being repulsed by someone being too invasive or too strong or too preoccupied. But avoidant people get dumped all the time as well. Avoidant people usually do the dumping, but sometimes avoidant people are the ones getting dumped for that reason. There's a whole Instagram scandal thing. So, yeah, okay. Well, Minneapolis, you got one. And I'll point out yet again that Seattle is still the winner with 3 yeses, and they're all still married. The UK version that I watched had 3 yeses, but Steven and Sabrina got divorced. So Seattle's still in the lead with Zach and Bliss. Although you could argue that Zach and Bliss don't really count, right? Because they weren't in the hallway, but, they were featured. And then you have Kwame and Chelsea, and then you have Tiffany and Brett, right? Although you also could argue that it's not really Seattle, it's like half Portland, right? Because Brett was from Portland, Tiffany's from Seattle, and Zach and Bliss from Seattle, and Chelsea and Kwame from Seattle. Anyway, Kwame was from Portland. That was that whole scene of like, Seattle ain't shit. That's not what he said. Anyway, I'm rambling. Well, let's continue watching. Looks like there's some other stuff left to see. And then there's the reunion, which I'll continue watching into that.
I fell in love with this girl, and I am still in love with her, and I'm devastated to not have that person in my life anymore. But I'm a true believer that love is blind. And that's a lot to say after someone who just got walked off on the altar.
I will say that Ben seems very chill about it. The most chill we've maybe ever seen. He seems more chill about it than Sarah. So I don't know if he's just everyone grieves differently. Some people can be having extremely sad experiences, and it can be a devastating loss. And people, I write about this in my grief book, and I found this in my research, that people can seem like they're fine when it was very impactful to them. So there's different ways of coping, and none of the ways, especially in the acute phases of grief, generally speaking, we don't characterize them as pathological or unhealthy or something. It's just the way that they're doing it. So we should allow for that. But there's a possibility that he just isn't as affected by it, which is consistent, I guess, if we go with that hypothesis that maybe he was never really invested. The way that he approached Sarah seemed less intense. Sarah seemed, I assumed it wasn't this way because of the way things were going. But, I also think that he was going to say yes. So what does that say? I think he's just blunted emotionally in a certain way, or he's just super chill, which isn't rational because no one is that chill. And it's a falsehood that particularly toxic masculinity will try to present, right? And it's a very destructive notion. So there's a possibility. Let's just go. Let me walk myself through that. He was he was willing to get married while being super relaxed about it. Like he didn't care. He would have just rolled with it. Like he was just distant about the whole thing. So what I'll say is that if I leave out the yes at the altar, then there's a possibility that he wasn't that invested, and it does kind of show in the way that he was approaching things. You could even say that it pertains to the way he would respond to the values questions that Sarah would have. He seemed to be really dismissive and avoidant and just, not really interested in getting into it and not interested in resolving, right? That's one of the things that I've said or thought that you can say about Devin and about Ben is that, okay, there might have been some value or political stances that were different. It certainly looked that way. But if you just go off the way that they responded, they basically were saying that they agreed, but in such a milquetoast way, in such a vague way that it's very suspicious, right? That you would imagine that, they're answering the way a politician would, in that on paper they're agreeing, but they're not saying enough to indicate that they really are on board with it, because they would say more, but we just don't know. Some people just don't want to talk about it, or they don't know enough, or they've avoided it because of privilege or issues, or, from the beginning, I've been wondering what is going on with Ben. Is he just avoided? Because, some people have traumas around these kind of topics, and even though they are privileged, I suppose, and that could be a factor, they don't know anything, or they know very little about this sort of thing for reasons that we might be able to understand. So, and we just never heard anything. But if we go with the hypothesis that he wasn't really invested, it does kind of scan, right? Because Sarah was way more into it. She was very in love, and she was like, more Ben, please, physical and emotional, and oh my God, he's the best. And he was pretty not that way, And if he was more invested, you think that there would be more of himself in it, right? That the values question and the religious question, you think he would engage more. And so getting back to what I was going to say about Devin and about Ben is, regardless of whether or not they aligned or how much, it's very likely that they didn't align value-wise and politics-wise, but they both didn't try to engage. And Virginia put it well when she said, I'm a smart person, and why wouldn't you engage with me on this? So, I don't know if that's Virginia, what she said precisely, but something like that. And that's one way of looking at it. Or another way is just a lack of valuing conversation, a lack of valuing discourse, a lack of valuing understanding what the other person is passionate about, and reading the room and saying, okay, you know what? I don't know much about it, and I personally am not that interested in talking about it, but I know you are. So let's talk about it. Here is my very simplistic view on Black Lives Matter, or abortion, or about equal rights, or about LGBTQ people. Here, I don't know, but do you have a response to that? Or at the very least, so you tell me, what's your position on these areas? Tell me what's going on. And because I know it's a big deal to you, it sounds dismissive. There's a way of saying this that doesn't sound, I know it's a big deal to you and your little hobbies, that I'm not trying to come across that way, but it's coming out that way. Anyway, so yeah, you could say that they didn't try, and that's a red flag. Even if it wasn't about politics or about values, you could say it's maybe a traditional view of marriage where don't ask, don't tell, or, meaning that you just understand that, look, there's women and then there's men, and there's husbands and wives, and you just don't really talk about much. You're not really best friends. You're not really peers. You're not really partners. You're not really best friends. You build a family and you stay quiet about stuff. That is a more traditional view. And, it's quite possible that Ben and Devin had that point of view. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not compatible with Virginia and Sarah. But it's just kind of notable how chill Ben is about it. By the way, I did the stats, if you're interested. I updated the statistics. So we have 9 total seasons, if we include the UK season, which means we have 270 cast members. Remember at the beginning of the season when the hostess was saying that there's even more people, and it doesn't look like there's more people. I guess I couldn't do a count. Maybe I will for a second. Okay, mystery solved. Instead of 30 cast members, 15 and 15, there was 32 cast members. So there were more than ever. There were 2 more cast members. So that throws off my math a little bit because I calculated percentages. 9 total seasons, 272 cast members, 136 possible couples, 50 featured couples 60 engagements that we know of. In fact, I think it's 61 if we include, did Brittany and Mo get engaged? Anyway. In terms of featured couples, there have been 50 featured couples in the edit. So that means that you have a 37% chance of getting engaged and being featured if you're just a cast member. There have been 32 weddings. So you have a 64% chance of the 50 featured couples to make it to the altar. And there are 17 married couples. So of the weddings, there have been exactly 17, very close to 17. Wait, I need to redo the math on that. So 17 divided by 32 is 53%. So if you make it to the altar, there's a 53% chance of a yes, yes, which isn't great, but something. And if you go on the show, just full stop, then you have a 13% chance, or I think 12.5%, rounded up 13% chance of getting married. So of all the 272 cast members that have been on the 9 seasons, each individual has a 13% chance of getting married. But there have been 3 divorces, so there are 14 couples that are still married, which means you have about a 10% chance of getting married and staying married for a couple of years, because there's only been a couple of years on average for all the seasons. So, it's not bad. I've said this before, that people will make fun of reality TV or shows like this and say that it's all fake, or that it's a really stupid reason to go on the show to try to find someone to get married. But if you said to someone, look, you're going to take 10 days out of your life, or maybe 12 days, to go on this reality TV show, and you're going to go into these pods, and you're going to have to give up your phone, and you have a 1 in 10 chance of not only getting married, but getting married to someone that is potentially your person or a person, I think a lot of people would take that chance. I mean, it's just 12 days, just 10 days or something. Now, the downside is, what if the edit is bad, or you end up being a Dave or someone else? By the way, I also have been keeping notes on the 2 lists, like what would so-and-so do, is, admirable people. And I put Molly actually on the list. Although we didn't see a lot of Molly, but she really exhibited, and I haven't watched the reunion yet, so I don't know. I put Sarah as an honorable mention, but the Mount Rushmore, I suppose, of Love is Blind, to me anyways, Marshall, Lauren, and Cam, Amy and Johnny, Freddie from UK, and now Molly. So there's that. Concerning people, I added no one from this season, actually. Honorable mentions, I added Madison and Alex for reasons we've already talked about. But the Alex stuff is complete allegations, and it's just hard to know. Could be a lot of credibility to it, but it was basically just one Facebook comment. And then everything else was just other, circumstantial stuff. Madison had some concerning behavior for sure, but it was, after rewatching, I think I understand. So there's really no one from this season. And maybe that's why a lot of people are saying this season is boring, because there was no Hannah or Jeremy or Tyler or Steve, Steven, who cheated, or Micah or Irina. Why is it Irina on this list? I need to add Irina. Irina, season 4. I guess I just forgot her. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get back to the show.
Constantly giving the benefit of the doubt. But you cannot date someone for their potential, because they may never reach the potential. Even though I did not get married today, I do believe love is blind. That is the best kind of love.
She either knew or gave it some more thought and decided not to bait Den. What? I do that sometimes. Date Ben. Yeah, that usually is what happens. And it is a bit of a confusion for me, because you would think if you were that close, at least when you give it another month just to kind of see without the pressure, right? Get more information. But I think it's quite possible. I could imagine that the letdown of the whole experience throws such a wrench into the gears that you're just like, yeah, I just can't. It's sort of, I don't know why this popped in my head, but it's sort of akin to how if a famous person rises to fame very quickly and there's no way to sustain that because no one can, then they will always feel like a loser. Like, I watched this documentary on YouTube about the band a-ha, and I love that album. I don't like any of the other albums by a-ha, but that first Hunting High and Low is actually a legit good album. Every song, or most of the songs, are pretty good. And, everyone knows Take On Me, and that's, it's a good song, but the rest of the album actually has a lot of merit to it, I think. And they were ginormous with Take On Me, in like 1985 or something. And it was just downhill from there, even though they were still very, very successful. But they just seemed to constantly be at odds and upset about where their career was going. Whereas if they had a slow climb, so if you had this meteoric rise to the altar and then you have to slide back, it can feel relatively like you're massively failing, right? Whereas if you reached where you would be at this level of closeness and getting to know someone without thinking about weddings and altars and stuff, then you might be really happy that you found someone. Another thing that I think they would say is that it's not a matter of time, it's a matter of intensity. The amount of intensity that they experience is not reflective of the time, right? And they'll say this, it's like, I could date someone for 2 years and not know this person or know us as well as I do given this process, so I guess that's another reason. And I don't know, from the outside, I was pulling for Sarah anyway. And I guess when I think about it, there is definitely a better puzzle piece for Sarah. There's a better partner. I hope it wouldn't be hard in Minneapolis to find someone that was very much in alignment with her values and her political points of view and religious lifestyle, and someone that is a good person. It shouldn't be hard, I hope, to find someone like that. So, maybe it is for the best, but I don't know. And then I wonder if Sarah is such a pleaser as her family was pointing out, and a good person, like like she sees people in a good light, that it was more her vision of Ben that was carrying the day, or of their relationship, regardless of values and politics, that she and her passion and her goodwill was the main driving force instead of their legitimate compatibility. I don't know.
Is to choose people for how they make you feel. I am ultimately very proud of myself. And I do feel like I've grown from this in so many ways.
By the way, it looks like a number of weddings, because their wedding was at the venue that my niece and now nephew got married at. I don't know why that is kind of cool, just to see somewhere that I've spent a day at with my family. It's a big deal because this niece is the oldest kid in that in the next generation. In fact, I wonder even what we call it, because I'm Yonsei, which is fourth generation Japanese. So you had Issei, Nisei, Sansei, and Yonsei. I wonder what we call fifth generation. They're all quarter Japanese, but it counts. So she's the oldest fifth generation. She's the first to get married from that generation. So, it was a big deal. Anyway.
Her, and I love her. I can't imagine a life that doesn't have her in it. So I'm just like really hurt.
Gosei. I look it up, which makes sense. Ichi, ni, san, shi, go. So Gosei is the children with at least one Yonsei parent. Yeah. Okay. Gosei. All right, well, that's the end of the wedding episode. Let's move on to the reunion. I'm excited to see what happens. So tune in next time, and everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.